you have to make the connections and you have to get experience. You can do that in an expensive film program, but you don't have to do that. There's so many events around the city that support you meeting other creative people. Every large company in the US has an internal communications unit. They pay really well. Nina Fiore, I'm the founder and executive director of the Astoria Film Festival here in New York City. Have 2 degrees from Harvard, and I worked in media and television production. And, when I worked there in the 90s, I created a lot of interactive television projects and digital projects. And then, how do you use social media and how do you do podcasting? And so in 2006 and 7 and 8, I was kind of researching all of that and teaching the MTV network staff how to do that. And that includes, MTV includes MTV, obviously, but also VH1, Nickelodeon, Paramount Stations Group, Paramount Pictures. So there's a lot of things that come under that header. Action. Hollywood is a very hard thing to break into. So that just is across the board. But yes, I think once you get in and people keep hiring you for more gigs, it can support you. However, it's not always steady work, even for the people who get in. They may have a job that, is great. They may do an amazing work on an amazing film, and it may end up another 2 years before they get the next gig. And for those who don't make it to Hollywood, they can still make a living, but a lot of them have to supplement that, whether it's teaching, whether it's, wedding videos and ceremonial videos of, children's events or whatever. What I think people don't realize here and abroad is that if you have the filmmaking skills to do video, create video, and come up with storytelling and ideas, and also do editing, you can make a great living if you look into corporate communications. So every large company in the US has an internal communications unit that creates films for their employees, for trainings, for entertainment, for publicity and advertisement. And they pay really well. And then there's a lot of crossover between Hollywood and those platforms. So oftentimes corporations will bring in Hollywood people to do work. And then if you're working for that company, you get to meet those Hollywood people, and then maybe they'll take you out for a gig out there, right? So my suggestion would be to people who are looking to get into Hollywood and don't have like an uncle or a father who's already in a union, would be to first look into corporate communications work with similar skill sets, because you will probably come across those same people from Hollywood, but actually be pulling a paycheck. Action. Connections are the thing. So if you can afford to spend a few years as an unpaid or very lowly paid production assistant, and then you can get into, and you're good at networking while you're there, and you can get into the next gig and the next gig and the next gig, then, that's another way to get at it. If you don't have that financial security, then the other options are probably a better way to go at it, right? Because then you can support yourself while you still create. And then you still, like everyone I knew at MTV was still making films on the side and, writing scripts in their spare time or on company time, depending on who they were and what we had going on that day. Because we all similarly came from backgrounds that couldn't support us to do that on our own. So it really depends. Action. If you look at Google any films behind the scenes, who's there? It's usually not anyone but white men. I think that the industry is traditionally white male cisgender, right? Um, but I know that there are a lot of efforts underway, especially right now, to change that and try to make it more representative and more inclusive and more diverse. I mean, our festival very much wants to support everyone and create equal representation for, you know, immigrants, first gen, BIPOC, women, disabled people. You know, they're all being left out of the conversation when it comes to film and media production. So I know a lot of organizations like us are trying to bring that perspective more into frame. I'm skeptical. I don't know if the big companies are truly going to do it, but I hope they do. I hope they do.
Action.
English skills, unfortunately, are required, you know, a required thing. Unless they be, you know, if they find a group of filmmakers who speak the same language that they speak, that's always a way. And there's always groups of immigrants here doing different creative work. So that's definitely a possibility. You have to look into a smaller niche versus a wider net, depending on your English skills, right? Your confidence about your English skills are a whole other story. And that makes a huge difference in everything, right? And I think that confidence of going into a new situation and maybe being a beginning filmmaker or maybe just having learned English, um, it's scary, it's daunting. But if you have confidence, then you can kind of pull it off better than if you don't have confidence, even if you don't have the skill, which I've seen over and over again in life. So.
Action.
Interesting. I did, when I was at MTV, I did travel a great deal between New York and LA because a lot of our, like, so the MTV shows, the productions that we worked with were based in LA. And meanwhile, all of our headquarters were in New York City. A lot of New York companies have LA production hubs. LA tends to have more of the actual production houses. They have the studios. I mean, Paramount Pictures was originally started here in Astoria, right? It was started in Astoria. That's what Kaufman Astoria Studios used to be, the base for Paramount Pictures. They moved out there in the 30s because after the Depression, you know, that land wasn't really settled much yet. I mean, if you figure the 1930s, you had to use, you know, your filming ability was very dependent on light and weather. So it was better out there for that, but also it was cheaper, the land, and it was tax free for a while. Now it's not tax free. The weather and light can be managed here in a studio, so things have changed. So I mean, there's production going on both coasts. But just to say, like, so there's plenty of work. You know, there's work here, there's work there. Um, some people just, it depends where you know more people, because that's where you're going to get your gigs. If you know filmmakers on the East Coast, they're going to get you into their productions. If you know filmmakers on the West Coast, they're going to get you into their productions. It's all about networking in this industry, unless, again, you get a corporate job.
Action.
No, I don't, is the short answer. If your family has plenty of money and they can pay for your schooling and they can support you while you're in school, you might as well. Why not? But again, the reason those programs are useful is not because of the skills they teach you, but more because of the connections you make while you're in those programs. There's so many resources these days online. You could learn for free how to edit. You can learn for free how to, you know, about camera operation and sound operation. Um, Go out and do it, make your own stuff, do it again and again and again, so that you've made tons of stuff and you've made mistakes that you then figured out how to correct, and find other filmmakers who want to do that with you. And you go to, film festivals, meetups that are free. There's so many events around the city that support you meeting other creative people. I grew up here in Astoria, working class family, immigrant parents, and I went to Harvard. And so everybody thinks Harvard, right? Like you come out of Harvard, you're going to be a millionaire. When you come out of Harvard, everyone will throw jobs at you. And that's not the case. What happens is that the people who get into Harvard usually came from money to begin with. So their families already have the connections that give their kids the jobs when they come out of Harvard. If your family didn't already have those connections, they're not going to make them because you went to Harvard. And, it's not the same end result.
Action.
I think learning how to write grants is one of the more important things young filmmakers should spend time learning. And there's plenty of free webinars teaching about that. The local government is very, very supportive. So Queens itself is very supportive, though the federal grants are harder to get, obviously. But the local grants are not as hard to get. So the Queens Council on the Arts, for example, funds a lot of our work too. And they fund a bunch of our filmmakers from festivals have gotten their films funded through Queens Council on the Arts. And there's tons of nonprofit organizations that support the arts. And it's a great resource, and it's very underutilized, and you kind of have to dig, you have to search, you have to really dedicate time each week.
Action.
I don't need to see any more versions of the Hulk or Spider-Man or whatever. I need to hear people's independent personal stories. And I think those are the types of films, those are the types of media that will move humanity forward. And I can't emphasize the importance of those stories enough. So I really hope that anyone who has a story that they've been reluctant to share, or they think people won't care, I'm sure, I guarantee there's an audience that really needs to hear it and see that. And I hope you create that.